Hello everybody and welcome to another video. This week I'm going to be repainting one of my old tanks, as seems to be tradition on this channel. My original Imperial Guard scheme was winterized, and I mainly focused on scions but started adding tanks later into the process. But since doing that, I've decided on a new scheme, at least for the tanks and a few of the regular infantry. The scions are going to stay winterized, so I thought I'd update this Chimera that I have to bring it in line with the newer tanks and also some of the newer guard I've been painting. As you can see, the techniques are vastly different, and in my opinion, one looks vastly better than the other, so I'm going to be updating this guy. Plus, this is the guard scheme I've been going with. It's really fun, and the new sculpts are some of the best stuff GW's ever done. But none of this is new to anyone who's watched the channel for a while. You've seen me kit bash and repaint tanks several times over, and you've definitely seen this scheme painted before. So this isn't going to be a tutorial of how to weather and kit bash tanks. If you want to know a bit more about that, then I've got a video linked in the top right now where I painted the Rogel Dawn battle tank. So instead of talk you through the process of painting and kit bashing a tank, I thought I'd talk to you about 10th edition. I've been lucky enough to see a little bit behind the curtain, and while I can't reveal much, I can talk about how it made me feel and what I think 10th edition is going to do to the hobby. One thing to nip in the bud early is the veracity of the claim that the game is simplified but not simple. I believe that's true. The core system is much simpler than it was in 9th, and it plays a lot better. In the couple of games that I've played, it's been a lot smoother and faster. It's been a really enjoyable experience and very quick to pick up. There are a few hang-ups from 9th edition, so there are lots of datasheet nuances, but the universal keyword system they've come up with really streamlines the process. There seems to be a lot of emphasis on every unit having a unique ability. Now, across armies, it's somewhat similar. Gene Stealers reroll wounds when on objectives, but so do Assault Intercessors. So there is matchup there, but when you're looking at an army in isolation, every unit does something slightly different. All of the complexity that there is on the datasheets and in the detachment rules. As it stands, we only have one detachment per army, but I have a feeling when the codex is released that we're going to see multiple detachments appear, or at the very least some changes. So, for example, there's no White Scars detachment right now, but it's entirely possible in the Space Marine Codex there will be one that's more geared towards White Scars that anyone can use. But keeping the complexity down at the unit and detachment level means you don't actually have to think about too much in each game. Every Space Marine chapter, for example, gets the Oath of Moment army rule, so you know every time you're going to be picking a unit in your command phase and re-rolling stuff against it. What it means is that when you bring a new unit or new army, you only have to focus on the little detachment bits and the datasheet bits that set it apart from what you've already been playing. It keeps that fresh flavour of bringing new units to the fight, but also means the army plays very similarly every time. I still think there's a lot of nuance between armies. The Black Templars play very differently to the standard Gladius task force. Likewise, Blood Angels play differently to Black Templars. Now, I'm leaning heavily on the Space Marine example here, but that's because Templars and regular Space Marines are very similar, and they're the two armies I've played, but they felt very different when I played them. So if there's a lot of difference between two armies that are very similar at the ground level, then the difference between Drukhari and Necrons, for example, is going to be wild. And yet the system will still feel familiar, as there's a fair bit of overlap between the datasheet rules. Going back to the universal keyword thing, I think it's a great move. It's been so simple and easy to pick up. There's loads on the datasheets, but seeing words like sustained hits or lethal hits, I immediately know what's going on. Likewise, when I'm playing against an opponent and they show me what's on their datasheet, I can pick up what that unit's meant to do instantly. Instead of looking through the rules and wondering why everything's named different and trying to get my head around what's happening, it's just simple. It's not perfect. The little rule that the Gene Stealers have for re-rolling wounds on an objective that the Assault Intercessors and Chaos Space Marines also have, they're all named differently, but they're right there on the datasheet, so it's not too hard to pick up. It's not like before where you had to rifle through the codex. Another fun thing is how characters interact. You can pick up to 3 enhancements for your army. These can only be given to characters, and they essentially work in the same way that maybe a relic or a warlord trait would in the previous editions. They're all very powerful, but because of the way characters attach to squads now rather than affecting multiple, it doesn't feel broken. And yet at the same time, it still feels like a bit of hero hammer. Your captain is going in, and he is going to wreck face with his relic power sword. An example I can give of this is the heroic moment my Blade Guard captain lost his bodyguard unit and went charging in by himself, activated his once per game finest hour rule, so he got an extra 3 attacks, used his relic to get an extra attack, and managed to wreck his way through a bunch of Necron destroyers. It can only happen once per game, and when it happens it is brutal, but after that he's just a character by himself. And ultimately that's what Space Marine captains should be doing. In terms of how much things die, elites and infantry still do fall over after sustained firepower, but I found that things like Land Raiders stick around for a long time. The smokescreen keyword that is universal across all armies now is such a great tool. Making it -1 to hit and adding 1 to the armor save means that your tanks are going to be there at least until turn 3. I found that my Land Raider Redeemer managed to survive until turn 3 despite taking really heavy firepower throughout most of the game. And by that point it had achieved its objective by using the really cool assault ramp rule and dropping Helbrecht and a bunch of Sword Brothers into the enemy lines. Now all of this sounds like peaches and cream, and for the most part it really is. I've been so impressed by the game system this far. It's only taken about 2.5 hours to play roughly 2,000 point games. It's also worth mentioning at this stage I'm using the old points from 9th edition because we don't have the points for 10th just yet. So right now it's looking really good, but as always there are opportunities to ruin it. Detachments are going to be something we have to keep an eye on. If Games Workshop add too many detachments for every army, it's going to become a lot like 9th edition with those armies of renown. It's just very difficult to balance properly. Now I don't need my game to be 100% balanced. It's superhuman warriors and aliens fighting each other 40,000 years in the future. I don't mind if it's a little bit janky here and there, but we don't want the crazy combinations that we saw at the end of 9th. Another thing to watch carefully is individual unit strength. Now a way to fix a lot of the issues I'm about to bring up is with points and just making things a bit more expensive. But an early warning sign and example is the Sword Brothers. I mentioned them earlier, they're absolutely epic, they've had a wonderful glow up, but if you stick 10 of them with Helbrecht and mastercrafted power weapons and charge them into anything, especially if you're using the Vow that gives you exploding 6s to hit, you're going to rinse your way through most of an army. Now that's just one example, but there are definitely a few Death Star units out there, and it's just something we need to keep in mind that is probably going to be rebalanced as the codices come out. Overall though, my experience with 10th so far, limited as it is, has been overwhelmingly positive, and I think everyone's going to be really pleased. It's much simpler to play, and while there are a few janky changes like combi weapons, you'll see soon, ultimately it's a much better, streamlined, cleaner edition, and I've had a great time playing it. Those are my initial thoughts on 10th edition without spoiling too much because I don't want to get in trouble. Let me know what you think. If you're hyped or not looking forward to it, let me know. If you're watching this a little bit in the future, how have you found 10th so far? It's time to show off the tank I've been painting in the background. I've been Sam. See you next time.